afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Nicole Gowett. I'm a reporter with CNN, and I'm going to be moderating today's event on the value of biodiversity to our communities, to our planet, to our economies. Exactly 1 year from now, the parties of the Convention on Biological Diversity will be meeting in Kunming, China. They're going to be adopting a new global biodiversity framework that will see us through to 2050. Business as usual is not an option in Kunming. And today we're going to hear from some of the key leaders who are going to see us through to this new global framework. Kicking us off will be Laura Tuck, who is the World Bank's Vice President for Sustainable Development. Laura, please join us.
Wow. Thank you, everybody, and thanks for coming. It is so fantastic to see so many people excited about this subject. I've been saying that 2018, starting last year, was the year that science not only spoke to us, it started screaming at us. Those of you inside the bank have heard me saying this over and over. Starting last fall, the world's leading climate scientists came together and gave us a big wake-up call. We had the update of the IPCC report, we had a report from UNEP, we had the Resilience Center, we had tipping points, we had lots of different reports that came out, and they told us, all of them said the situation was worse than we thought, and we weren't on track to address it. So climate has to be one of our top priorities, but what I've been saying is, it's not just climate. It is not just climate. In 2018, we also got all kinds of new science about the natural resource base that provides the ecosystem services we need for human health and for economies, for jobs and for well-being. And the report that came out from the IPBES, which Bob Watson will talk to us in a little bit about, was a really important among those wake-up calls that we got. And at the same time the IPBES report came out, the Institute for Public Policy Research came out, and they said that the negative effect of combining warmer temperatures with the massive and rapid degradation and depletion of ecosystems we're seeing today is creating a new domain of risk that is hugely underestimated by policymakers, even though it may pose the biggest threat of any to mankind. This could be worse than what's happening in climate. So it's something that it's great that everybody's focusing on. Nature is the foundation for health and economies, the source of our food and water and medicine, protection against weather, the air we breathe, everything. And if we don't take care of our biosphere, we can't provide for any of those things. So that sounds pretty obvious. I think everyone here is convinced of that. But you know what? It's not exactly what we're doing. If you think about it, something like 75% of all global food production relies on animal or insect pollination. But hundreds of species, the ones that pollinate our very crops, are going extinct. And you've read, I'm sure, all about this potential sixth-mass extinction. We can't produce the food we need if we don't pay attention to that. Think about something like mangroves. We have estimates that $2.7 trillion worth of ecosystem services are generated by mangroves every year. They protect on all kinds of things like storm surges, coastal erosion. They filter pollutants. They are the fish nurseries, support food production. But we've destroyed 35% of them in the last 20 years, and they're disappearing at a rate of 1 to 2% a year. So we could go on, and you all know these examples. But the main point, without a healthy planet, we cannot have healthy societies and healthy economies, and that is fundamental. So before I turn the mic over to Bob, who will tell you a lot more about this, I just wanted to make 3 observations. So the first is that the markets and the analytical tools that we typically use don't value nature systems adequately, hence some of what we're going to focus on today, and that we need to move much more forcefully in this direction, and we need to do this a lot better. So everybody knows that. Nature, since years, since time immemorial, we've been worrying about how nature and the services it provides are not priced well. We have a hard time quantifying them and the value we get from them. But there are some tools that we can use, and to get these kind of decisions that we need to make factored into the economics of them, factored into our decision making. So one of the things we've been working on this year is this global program on sustainability, or GPS, to help countries put a value on their natural capital. We've been doing this in different versions for some time, but really to help countries understand their total total wealth. Natural capital is an asset like all other assets, and when it's depleted, the value of their wealth is depleted, and we need to help them understand that and show it quantitatively. And you're going to hear today from Zambia how they've been able to integrate natural capital into their economic planning, and they've put a value on their natural assets, and they've made a number of decisions to protect them, and that's a great way to go. Another approach, and there are lots of good examples, but just to be complete here, is more traditional tools. Taxes, subsidies, payment for environmental services, things like taxes on wildlife tourism or carbon taxes, subsidies to communities who don't invade protected areas, payment for environmental services like cities or utilities who pay people upstream for conservation or restoration activities to reduce, say, turbidity that's going into a water utility and so forth. There are lots of other examples. So that's the first point. We need to find these tools and use them. The second is that nature is, of course, super important for climate. Coming back to the very first point, nature helps us adapt. I don't need to go on about this. Introducing agroforestry systems that improve soil fertility and water retention, at the same time increasing biodiversity, planting mangroves. I just said there are lots of examples, but it can also help with mitigation. So the recent research shows that nature-based solutions could provide around 30% of the cost-effective climate mitigation that we need by 2030 to stay below 2 degrees. According to that IPBES report, marine and terrestrial ecosystems are the only sinks for anthropogenic carbon emissions, sequestering the equivalent of some 60% of those emissions. So if that's true, this is something where we have to put a big focus. So the third point, and then I'll stop, is just that the World Bank has been investing a lot in nature, and we're really trying to ramp up this year our focus more and more. Right now we have a portfolio of about 150 projects worth about $8 billion. We've supported the creation of around 116 million hectares, for example, of marine protected areas, 7 million hectares of terrestrial protected areas. We're building new programs, one on ProBlue, looking at marine ecosystems, one called ProGreen, looking at terrestrial ecosystems to complement the resources that we put out with IDA and IBRD. So just to close there, we have a huge opportunity to lead up in the lead up to Kunming next year. We need everybody here to put the focus on this agenda. We look forward to working with our partners, IUCN, GEF, UNEP, to really put some wings on this agenda, and hope it flies this year. Thank you. Thank you all.
Laura, thank you so much for those remarks. As a beekeeper, the stat on pollinators resonates. It's sort of terrifying. I'd now like to invite Sir Robert Watson to the stage. Sir Robert chaired the most recent global assessment on biodiversity, which has been a clarion call to us all to act now to protect nature's contribution to people. Sir Robert, the stage is yours.
Well, first, thank you very much for inviting me here. And what I'd like to do is quickly run through just a few of the key messages from the IPBES report. Fundamentally, we're destroying nature. We've already converted 75% of the ice-free land, and by 2050 it'll be 90%. 66% of the oceans are totally degraded with plastics, ocean acidification, and have become warming. We've lost 85% of our wetlands, and 1 million out of 8 million species are threatened with extinction. 500,000 plants and animals, 500,000 insects. The key point is we've focused on the provisioning services, which are crucial, of course: food production, fibre production, energy production, and these, of course, have economic value, they have market value. But what we've done is, as we've focused on the provisioning values and converted our ecosystems, we're losing the regulating services, regulating climate, pollution, floods, pollinators, diseases, and we're losing our cultural services, sense of place, identities. And so fundamentally, as we focus on market value, we've ignored non-market and social value, and our ecosystems are in bad shape. So what are the drivers? Well, there's the indirect drivers, the core drivers, and the demographic, of course, socio-cultural, economic and technology can be good or bad, our institutions and governance. And then they drive the direct drivers. What's the main driver of loss on terrestrial ecosystems? We've converted our land to agriculture largely in a very unsustainable way. We've also overexploited our land. In the oceans, pollution is important, but it's overfishing. We've overcapitalized the fishing stock and we're losing fish just about everywhere in the world. Climate change has probably been the third most important driver of both the oceans and terrestrial systems, but it is likely to be as or more important than all the other drivers in the coming decades. Therefore, we've got to get rid of this thing that climate change and biodiversity are separable issues. They are not. They are one issue that needs to be tackled simultaneously. And as I've just said, we need to meet the Paris targets in order to try and protect biodiversity. But we're not on the right pathway. I mean, the Paris pledges are totally and utterly inadequate to meet the 1.5 to 2 degree target. We're on a pathway to 3 to 4 degrees Celsius, and actually many of the current pledges won't even be met. So we have a major problem that climate change, we have not got a handle on it. The rhetoric is there, the actions are not there, basically. Now, nature-based solutions can be cost-effective for both mitigation and adaptation, but there are some serious potential trade-offs. Very large-scale bioenergy, if you use monocultures to replace natural vegetation, will actually lose biodiversity, or if it stretches into arable land, it threatens food and water security. So nature-based solutions, reforestation, restoration can be very good, but we do need to look at the trade-offs and the synergies and potentially unintended consequences. Climate change and biodiversity are clearly environmental issues, but there's so much more. And I think the world is finally waking up. These are not just environmental issues. They're development issues. They affect food security, water security, energy security, human health, gender implications, the economic nature has values you've just heard from Laura, but also climate change or loss of biodiversity comes at an economic cost. There's security issues when you have natural resource depletion or climate change. Very poor people in developing countries are hurt most, and it can lead to local conflict and strife. And there's clearly ethical and equity issues. I've already mentioned one. It's industrialized countries that have caused the problem. It's poor people in developing countries that suffer most. And not only that, we're affecting adversely future generations. And the moral issue, we don't have the right to destroy nature. Are we making progress? These are the so-called 20 Aichi targets. The basic message is, if you see how many reds we've got there and a few models, we are not going to meet any of the Aichi targets in most parts of the world. We've got some good progress on some of them, but some are even going backwards. Key message for the people going to China next year. I keep hearing we need ambition. We're not even meeting the targets we promised 10 years ago. So until we understand why we're not meeting those targets, I hate to hear ministers keep saying we need more and more ambition. Why are we failing? This just simply says that if we don't deal with biodiversity loss and sustainably use biodiversity, we're going to undermine most of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And in fact, our conclusion is between climate change and biodiversity, literally none of the UN Sustainable Development Goals can be met unless we aggressively try and halt the changing climate and the loss of biodiversity. So what do we need? We need multi-sectoral planning. These issues aren't for environment ministers alone, energy ministers, agriculture ministers, finance ministers, foreign ministers. We've got to realise that agriculture is linked to energy, linked to water, linked to transportation. We need multi-sectoral planning at the very least. We need an evolution in our financing and economic systems. We've got to get rid or redirect the perverse subsidies on agriculture, transportation and energy. Over $1 trillion a year. We're not short of money. It's the way way we spend that money. We need to effectively embrace a circular economy. We need to put natural capital, as you heard from Laura, into national accounts to complement GDP. And we need inclusive governance structures. We need governments to work together, to trust each other. They need to work together with the private sector, work together with the NGOs, work together with indigenous and local people who are absolutely critical, especially on the biodiversity. But there's no trust anywhere. We've got to rebuild trust that we all have the same vision for the future and we all move into a common goal where no one is left behind, as it said in the UN SDGs. We've got the knowledge and we've got the tools to make a significant step in the right direction. We just have to use them, basically. Okay, maybe that was the last slide. I thought there was one more. Okay, so that's fine. I did it in actually less than 7 minutes. So the message is, we know what the problem is. People are saying the right things, we lack action. And hopefully between the 2 COPs next year, the actions... okay, there wasn't... Oh, there was an extra slide, yeah, fine. And I've said many of these things. We need to we need transformational change. If you look on Wikipedia, what does it mean? We need to change the way we change. Incremental change is not going to get us there. We need massive, systemic, holistic change. We need to absolutely look at climate change and biodiversity together. There are synergies and trade-offs, as I said. There are many policies and projects that are working in different parts of the world. We just need to scale them up, understand which ones are replicable and which ones are scalable. I've already said in particular, the economic and financial systems really do have to be transposed. We need to transform them. We don't need to get rid of capitalism, don't need to get rid of GDP, but we need to augment these basic tools, and we need, as I've said, inclusive governance structures. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Robert. That was galvanizing. Sir Robert's remarks make clear that nature is at a tipping point. It's grounds for gratitude that the bank is driving this conversation, but it's clear that everyone is going to have to do their part, whether you're a government minister or in the private sector like our next speaker. Helen Crowley is head of sustainable sourcing innovation at the French luxury garment group Kering, which has been a leader in tracking its environmental footprint through an approach that's called environmental profit and loss accounts. Kering has also joined with 32 global fashion and textile companies at the G7 in France this year, signing a fashion pact to protect the planet. Helen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So happy to be here. It's a privilege and honor, and I hope I don't trip over and fall flat on my face. Hard act to follow, Bob, but thank you so much. So I've got 5 minutes to talk to you and convince you about how our future and how business and how fashion depend on biodiversity and depend on natural capital. But let's just call it nature. We're going to talk about nature and the role of business in supporting and protecting nature, and particularly fashion. And as Bob articulated, we're at this pivotal moment. It could be seen as a sad moment, it can be seen as an opportunity, a pivotal moment. We're heading into a decade of delivery on bending our curves of biodiversity loss and bending the curves of climate change. And this is going to take unprecedented levels of collaboration, cooperation across sectors and within sectors. And it is going to take an unprecedented level of private sector engagement in this collaboration and cooperation to really take on nature-based solutions and to take on seriously natural capital and embed it in business practices. Now, one of the sectors that I'm going to focus on is the fashion sector. A little late to the game.
Microphone, please. Her microphone is not working well, please.
Ourselves with a presence now we're here.
I'm sorry, but the lady has no microphone, please.
Forever, since we've been wearing clothes. For being inspired, for the materials that we use. But we're now turning around and saying, okay, we've got to look at nature. We've got to differently. We've got to be circular, regenerative, restorative. We really depend on nature and we have impacts on nature. We've got to do something about that. And as a sector, as was just mentioned, we've come together just recently, catalyzed by President Macron, on 2 big initiatives. initiatives. One of them is the One Planet for Business initiative, which is 19 companies, fashion, food and cosmetics, that are focusing on solutions and actions and commitments around biodiversity in business. And the other is a fashion pact, which is 32 companies signed up, 150 brands, focusing on biodiversity, oceans and climate. And they've come together to say, we are really going to act, we are really going to do things, and we're going to focus on where our impact is. It's not just about commitments, it's focusing and understanding where impact is and doing something about it so that we can contribute as companies to us living in a safe operating space for humanity and living within our boundaries and bringing back mitigating our impact. So let's just talk a little bit about what impact looks like, because if we're going to understand our impact, we have to have some way of measuring it. So the way we've done it at Caring, and this is sort of a metaphor for across fashion perhaps, the supply chain impacts. We've done an environment profit and loss account, which was mentioned, a corporate natural capital account. And what this graphic shows you, it's the results of this natural capital accounting methodology. And in the columns, it's the tiers of our supply chain, and the rows are the environmental impact indicators. Basically, it shows that in tier 4 raw materials is where 60 to 70% of our impact is. That's where we've got to focus. Fashion is an agricultural, forestry-based sector. We have to look there, we have to focus there. That's our interface with biodiversity, and that's our interface with natural capital. So these commitments that are being made, commitments to action, are focused around different themes of work. One of them being, of course, no conversion of natural ecosystems, forests, but other natural ecosystems, and really looking and working with our supply chain and our suppliers to make sure we're not going to convert natural ecosystems and we're going to protect them. It's also working with smallholder producers and helping them transition to more regenerative, restorative approaches. We've only got 60 years of topsoil left if we're lucky. We have to be more regenerative and restorative in the way whether we grow organic cotton in India and Africa, or whether we work with the Kashmir herders in Mongolia and help them deal with what they're dealing with, which is land degradation, desertification and climate change, and help them create a more restorative, regenerative practice. Or rangelands, and this is for Emiliano, fabulous rangelands in Argentina and also Australia, where I come from. How can we work with wool producers, producing fibre and meat, to create more regenerative grazing practices that restore the soil, that don't pull the soil off, that restore it? And we need animals to do that. We need to mimic natural systems. So working with these producers through our supply chains and across our supply chains to create more regenerative sourcing. And it's not just about the soil and the biodiversity in the soil, it's also about the animals that range across these landscapes. How do we create systems where wildlife can live within these agricultural production systems? So they're not just in protected areas, but they actually have more space to range and roam. And of course, not just about where we source our materials, but the impacts we have on other ecosystems. So the fashion sector is looking through these different initiatives. How can we, of course, mitigate and avoid plastics, micro and macro in the ocean? How can we avoid agricultural runoff? How can we help support a much more thriving ocean, which is our ultimate nature-based solution? So like the Malagasy say, let's be wise, like the chameleon, with one eye on the past and one eye on the future. And let's make sure that our clothes and the products that we make are good. And they're good, deeply good, because they are going to be built on responsible supply chains that respect nature, that regenerate and restore nature. And that's where we're heading, and we have an incredible opportunity in these next 10 years to do that and show the world that we can actually bring business to do good and support society and nature. Thank you. I don't know how long it was.
Helen, thank you so much. It's so exciting to hear what the fashion industry is doing.
Was it?
Now that we've heard about what the private sector has been doing, we're going to hear about government and others and see what they're doing. I'm going to introduce our panel now. We have Naoko Ishii, who's Chief Executive Officer of GEF for the Global Environment Facility. If you'd please take your seat. Thank you. Alexander Chiteme is Minister of National Development and Planning for Zambia. Please take your seat, sir. Thank you. Dr. Suvanpeng Bupanavong is Minister to the Prime Minister's Office in Lao PDR. Welcome. And the Right Honourable Alok Sharma is Secretary of State for International Development in the UK. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, I've already told the panel that I'm going to be ruthless about keeping time because we have a lot of interesting material to go through. So let me start with Secretary Sharma. Could you tell us why you see biodiversity and nature-based solutions as so important to the UK economy, and what are you doing to realize those solutions?
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me here. I mean, I think this isn't just about the UK. I mean, this is a global issue. Could I just have a show of hands? How many of you here have got children or grandchildren? Okay, well, I mean, you know, me as well. I mean,
There is no microphone, please, if anybody listens. There is no microphone. I cannot hear in the booth.
to the whole issue of tackling climate change, and of course linking that with reducing biodiversity loss. We've just had a program of government this week in our parliament and looking at tackling climate change.
There is no microphone, please. If there is no microphone, there is no interpretation.
Prime Minister, can you hear me now? Is that better? Couldn't you hear me before?
No, I could not hear before.
But just to say that I don't know how many of you were at the UN General Assembly, but our Prime Minister made a number of really big commitments. One of them was on international climate finance, doubling our commitment towards that. We are, of course, going to be chairing COP26 next year in the UK, of course, together with our friends in Italy. And nature-based solutions is going to be a big part of that. We think that is somewhere where there is a big solution. But it isn't just about money. If I can just quickly highlight three areas where I think there is much more that we can be doing. So the first is about setting ambitious targets. Now, Bob was saying, you know, all this ambition, get on and actually deliver. And he's absolutely right. But I think unless you set the targets and aim high, you're not necessarily going to get there. So I think in China we need some good targets. And particularly, I think, from a UK perspective, what we want is countries to join in the alliance that we're leading on global oceans, where we want to protect at least 30% of global oceans by 2030. Secondly, as a government, we are working cross-government. All departments are engaged in this endeavour. But of course, what we also need to make sure is that we understand what is the economic impact, the economic loss of biodiversity loss. And so there is work that we are doing as a government on that through our finance ministries. And the third thing is to make sure that we put better systems in place to ensure that our actions are sustainable at the end of the day. I just want to give you one example of what can happen when you get this wrong. So I was in Ethiopia recently, and those of you who know the country will know that around 15 million people, one way or another, depend on the coffee industry. And by the way, it's fantastic coffee if you haven't tasted it. But if climate change continues the way it is and biodiversity loss continues the way it is, it threatens their livelihoods. So this is about future generations, but also current generations. And I'm very proud of the work the UK government is doing and leading on in this area.
Thank you so much for that. Secretary Sharma, could you share your mic with Dr. Bupanavong? Because I'm going to turn to her next. Okay. So by increasing protection of biodiverse areas, Lao is hoping to increase tourism and improve livelihoods in local communities. Can you tell us about the policy changes that you've made to make that happen and the challenges you've faced?
Thank you. First of all, I really like to thank the World Bank to have me this opportunity to be joining you and give Lao perspective for this area. Actually, many people will know Laos is a small country, but it's very rich of the biodiversity. If we think about if we compare with the Laos GDP, that it will be more than 10 times for our GDP now. And I really like to share with you that before this, something like 20 years ago, Laos never think about that we will face something really seriously of the damage of the loss of the biodiversity. Because we are just, at that time, it's something like 5 million people in the very big country with a lack of the potential of the water, of land, of the forestry, and we always think that we never lost, we never finish of our nature resources. We're happy to stay in that for a long time. And then no, something happened. You know, 2 years ago, we have very big rain, and our dam, one of our dam would collapse. And this year, last year, 2 years ago, when that happened, and last year we have the drought in the north and loss in the south of the country. It never happened. And our government really surprised of ourselves, and then we sit back and we think about the way that what we choose for our development path now. That will be happen, and then we choose to develop the green growth strategy for the year 2030. It's not easy for the Lao government, the country like a small like Laos, because we have the transition need for the investment of the country, really for the education, for the healthcare, for the everything that really pressing us that where we need to protect the nature resources, but where we get the resources here? We lack of the ability of the people, we lack of the budget, we need another. But is it really, we have to strong commitment by ourselves that we have to go to this way. We choose the way that we sure that we will have the long-term sustainability for development for our country, for our children, for our grandchildren, I think. Because I strongly believe that what we do in this now, that will be our future. We leave that for our future generations. And that will be the message that I really strongly like to to share with this event. But in the practical way that we do, what we do that we now, because Laos is plenty of the forestry, and we hopefully that we will develop the nature tour. Tourism, and we increase our income for help the protect, also for protect the forestry, and also we get the money for that. And then thank you for World Bank again, because actually you really World Bank working with our government to develop the scheme, the network that we will transition of our economic to the green growth perspective. For that, it's not easy, as I said before, because we need to really take the priority of the government to push more our resources that we have, to push in the perspective of the green growth strategy. And that will be the thing that I like to share with you.
Okay. On that note, I'm going to turn to Minister Chiteme. Zambia was an early adopter of national capital accounts, and I'd love for you to tell us how measuring or including the value of water and forests has helped you plan for Zambia's future.
Thank you again for having me here. I think I joined you earlier in 2018 in Paris, and where we were discussing basically the same things. Like I said before, which I'd like to repeat again here, I know that we are very constrained on time. I wish we had more than 75 minutes to begin to discuss what is affecting the whole world, and mostly the third world, which is in Africa. I would want to put it on record that we are one of the first adopters of natural capital accounts, and in Zambia, we have gone forward to put value on our water resource, our forest, and our land. And in doing that, that has really helped us in my country to formulate policies and frameworks on which we can be able to make sure that we get economic benefit from them, but at the same time, making sure that we don't degrade our land, we don't waste our water, and we make sure that we've got sustainable use of our forest. in doing that, I'd want to speak with practical examples on how we have learned as a country in Zambia that, for example, agriculture is not the only way to go. Because as far as I want to do a lot of farming, first of all, I'm cutting down my trees. If I'm going to do ranching, I am making sure that I'm overgrazed, and that is a problem. By putting value to it, I'm beginning to understand that I can use the forest in a sustainable way. I begin to learn that I can use my land, make sure that I have got better allocations on my land. What am I going to do with my land? Is agriculture? Am I going to use it for commercial sales? Am I going to use it for residential? Or am I going to use it for smallholder agriculture? All those are options that we have at our hands because now we've learned the value of our land. When I go to my forest account, now I know. Say, I have to move away from burning charcoal as a source of my energy, because that deforestrates my forest. But then I also have to find a way to mitigate me not burning my trees. What is the alternative? I have learned that I will have to educate my people.
Thank you. Thank you for that. An amazing example for the rest of us. I'm going to turn to Ms. Ishii. As the financial mechanism of the convention, how can Jeff's resources be used to draw in the private sector, both in terms of mobilizing resources and executing programs? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Scientists, including Bob Watson, already told us where we are losing the biodiversity. It's basically the conversion of land to agriculture. So as we all agree, we really need to focus on where that most of the impact will be actually realized. So that the good news is that together with many partners and then the private sector, the scientists, the government, and the business, that there is an enormous amount of conversion, that the convergence that are coming from the entire spectrum of the world, and how we can really make the agriculture or food and land use system much more sustainable. One of the examples of this coalition is Food and Land Use Coalition. I know that Laura is an ambassador. I'm the ambassador too. There may be more ambassadors in this room. But the beauty of this coalition is it's not really just the government. It's also the business. Helen made a point that what the business can do. So the business, the government, and the CSOs all come together to create much more, to transform the agriculture much more sustainable. On my part, as a GEF, that we actually brought the largest, single largest, the program of food and land use, the program, land use system program, and then with that there are three important components. We really want to focus on where we are losing the most critical, internationally critical biodiversity, and what are the crops and the landscape that we need to focus on. So we kind of identify that 30 countries and 10 crops, and we create this kind of mechanism that to bring all key stakeholders together, that the government, that the both national and local, and the business, particularly along the value chain of those, let's say, 10 key commodities. Then that the local and small scale holders, but also that all that the traders, that the treasurers, that even the consumers along the value chain, to create this space or the system to transform the entire value chain from unsustainable, currently unsustainable, towards sustainable. And I have to say, it's a beautiful plan. It's very challenging to implement. To bring those key stakeholders together is challenging. The good news is that there is an enormous amount of interest of trying to do it together.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the panelists and I are going to stay on the stage, and we're going to take a little break before the next round of questions for another talk. This one is from Emiliano Escura, who is Vice President of Argentina's National Park Authority, and he's going to tell us about some remarkable biodiversity corridors that Argentina has established in the Gran Chaco ecosystem. Emiliano, please.
Thank you all. Good afternoon. Very grateful and happy to be here. When you work in conservation, like Dr. Watson, national parks, your worst nightmare is extinction. If you manage a park and you're proud about it, not even the smallest species of insect can go extinct in your park. So the thing is, over the years, conservation biologists like Mr. Watson, Sir Watson, have been telling us about the problem with isolation, with protected areas becoming islands. We have to do everything in our power so that our parks are connected through corridors. There was even a piece in the Washington Post about it very short ago. And here we have one of the biggest parks in the north of Argentina, the Impenetrable. And this park belongs to the biggest dry forest in the world. It's the second biggest forest in the whole of the Americas after the Amazon, and my place in the world. And the thing about corridors is that you have to go outside of your jurisdiction where a lot of people are doing a lot of unsustainable things and tell them not to. And that's where the bulldozing is happening and the burning of forests for monoculture and grasslands, the typical thing. So what we decided to do was go into a project that has a very high rate of potential frustration and try to make it successful. And those are my friends there in the picture, the Guam people going to work. We found, together with a package of donation from the GEF to the Argentinian government, that is called corridors, rural corridors of biodiversity, that we can fight climate change, poverty, and biodiversity loss with a very simple solution. And it is working. For about a year, the Guam people, together with a group of small-scale farmers, have been working very hard, training with people on the ground, not just a workshop here and there. One whole year, training hard, doing what they already knew, because the Guam people, believe me, they belong to a nation that has a very strong link with collecting wild honey from tree to tree. So we wanted to keep it very simple for them, and we just told them, we're going to do the same, but just we're going to go bigger, we're going to have modern tools and access to markets. Those hives are placed in the middle of the forest, no impact. They're just there, and they work, many of them, with native bees. Bees that have no sting. So these bees produce honey without stinging you. Just like we should make our economies work without stinging the planet. And a year later, this is what happened. I went there and I bought my honey. We took $73,000 from this donation package with a target of benefiting 29 families. And that's not the best part. They are this close to certifying organic and exporting. One of the top quality honeys in the world. No, wrong. One of the top sustainable in terms of ecology, social, and environmental honeys in the world. That sounds better. And the good thing is, in 15 months, this project will not get any more money, will not get any more funding, and that is great. The Guam people are waiting for Independence Economic Day to come, because that is what these projects are about, that people do not need to be funded and funded forever. This workshop is about uncovering the hidden value of biodiversity, but believe me, it's not hidden. It's right there in front of our eyes. I read in the documents one question about how to make the finance minister care about the economics of biodiversity. Believe me, my honest question to that, the answer to that question is, how can you even be a finance minister today if you don't? Investing in nature is where really the highest return on the investment is. Investing in nature, just like this project is showing, is not only about investing in nature, it's making nature great again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emiliano. That was wonderful. I came here expecting to be inspired and to learn a few things. I did not expect to feel jealous, but hearing about Emiliano's bees that don't sting has me a little bit jealous. Okay, I'm going to turn back to Minister Chiteme. What kind of information and decision-making tools are useful for you as a planning minister, both in terms of influencing government programs and policies, but also influencing the private sector? They're crucial.
Thank you once again. As usual, let me start with a simple illustration, especially with a bee story that we've just heard. For me, and for my country, for the private sector and the government as well, the story is a bit different in Africa as it is maybe in another country like this one. The example that I gave about the forest. I have to change the mindset of my people from cutting down trees, which is their livelihood, to, for example, go into beekeeping. It's not a situation where I have beekeepers that I have to expand on. My problem with the forest is that people are cutting it down for energy. So I have to basically tell them to say, you no longer have to cut this tree because you can use it to hang a hive on. And then you can produce honey, which you can begin to sell out because we've got a huge market for honey. Another example is that our copper, because Zambia is a mono economy, we depend on copper. Today, copper is selling at $6,000 per ton, but a ton of honey is around $7,500. So, honey for me is more profitable than going.
It's $1,000 more per ton?
Yes.
Wow. I'm going to start selling honey.
So you see, we've got different situations in different locations. And for us, that is teaching us how we can involve the private sector, first of all, to finance the change that we need, which is mindset. And second of all, to make sure that we can educate our people from doing what they're usually used to doing something new. Today, if I told them to say, I'm going to stop you from cutting down trees, but I'm going to give you a goat that you can keep, and then it would give you meat and milk, but that does not come like tomorrow. That goat has to be with them for quite a long time before they can begin to harvest the fruits from the goat. So there lies the problem. I have to find money to make sure that I sustain these people until to such a point that they can begin to see benefit into the new venture that they have to do to replace the old venture that is degrading my forest. So we have to make sure that we come to the world. And that's where my point is. When we were introduced to the capital accounts, I should mention I wasn't a champion of them. I was skeptical. And I told my officers at my ministry, I said, here comes the West. Now they want to know my value for my water. They want to know the value for my land so that now they can come after it. You know, that's a problem that we have right now. Because when I'm speaking to some of my colleagues in planning and in finance, and I'm talking about natural accounts, it's like they don't really understand what we are talking about. And they don't know what policies they have to put in place to make sure that they achieve what they hope to achieve. But the problem is, we don't have the money to make sure that we conserve our forests, to make sure that we know how to make use of our water. Because we've been taught, I mean, when we did the water account from home, we discovered that we have to now sustainably use our water. We need to harvest the water. But to harvest water, you need to do a very good, maybe, earth dam to make sure that you keep the water there. The issue is that we are not doing this for Africa, for example. Because I was listening to someone speak today and they were saying that Africa is the least contributor to the emissions that are warming up our world. But you are asking us to do a lot more to make sure that we stay below the 2 degrees. And how are you doing that? You're coming to Africa to ask us to borrow money. You are coming to us with loans to preserve the environment that you and I have to live in, the environment that the grandchildren that he mentioned are supposed to live. We call it sustainability.
Minister Chitemi, I'm going to give you 30 more seconds. Are you done?
No, it's fine. I can leave. So
you were on a roll.
Thank you very much.
Very inspiring. Could you share the mic with Ms. Ishii? Emiliano has previewed my next question for Ms. Ishii, which is, what can we do to get governments and ministers of finance to be more invested in the idea that biodiversity is an environmental and economic
I was
positive?
smiling when I hear him saying how he or she can be a finance minister if he doesn't understand the value of nature. In my case, actually, I came from Ministry of Finance. I've never been successful in convincing my own finance minister of the value of nature or biodiversity. Even biodiversity is such a complicated word, so I have a huge challenge. So it's really a tough job. I think I am trying to do 2 things. That one, it's not only just the science, but many studies these days actually present not just the value on paper, but actually the business opportunity. So that actually to take care of the nature is actually creating a very good investment, a business opportunity, as the minister also pointed out. For instance, this Food and Land Use Coalition very recently launched a report, and they calculated if we transit from currently unsustainable farming or the agriculture system toward a sustainable food and land use system, that this transition actually not only save 5.7 trillion dollar per year, but actually create 4.5 trillion US dollar of the business opportunity by 2030 per year. So it means actually the more than 10 trillion the dollars of the business opportunity. It's actually not a small amount of money. It's actually quite huge. And the good part is that my second point is that it's something actually achievable, that there are quite a number of solutions already presented. But as I said in my previous remarks, this actually requires a lot of collaboration, the multi-stakeholder collaboration, from business smallholders, the CSOs, the conservation community, and most importantly, in my view, it's actually role of the government. Whenever I talk to the private sector, even enlightened private sector, very committed, they also tell us that at the end of the day, the policy and regulatory signal is extremely important. So the future of the planet is on your shoulder, ministers.
But no pressure. Dr. Bupanavong, I know that Laos has approved a green growth strategy. Could you tell us a little bit about the role that biodiversity and ecosystems are going to play in Laos' future growth, or that you hope they will?
Thank you for your question, Madam Moderator. I like to share for this point because our strategy, green growth strategy, was adopted early this year. Is quite take quite a year for many years with the help of our friend in the bank and another development partner to develop it with our really strongly commitment of the government that we will transform our development with the way direction of the green growth. But actually, we for that we have to revise the capitalize of our nature resources base. It's really the important because we never do it because we think it's too don't need to do that. But now it will be the start point of our strategy. We do it, and also now we focus on the sector of the tourism, forestry, and also the use of the water because we have the big potential of the water. We build the dam, we build the hydropower to export to the neighboring country, and then also we have to really go back to sit back to see that carefully for do that it's really give back to the country, give back to the economy, give back to the development or not, and we carefully more carefully at that point. And for the green growth strategy, actually we actually for the commitment is not enough. Actually, we have to develop the institution to deal with that. We have to prioritize for our budget, our resources, as I said before, that to go to the directions of the green goals, for the train the people to, like you said, the minister says that we have to train our people, which even train ourselves attitude, because we used to be think that we never will loss of our nature because it is too rich of our country. We said that something in our country you can imagine because just the something in the land that we can have something to eat in that. We don't need to planting it. That will be the thing that in the past. And that's why with that attitude, it's really challenges for us to let ourselves to understand, to changing ourselves, to let our people change their behavior for the thing that they used to believe in that. Like you, because we heavily have the illegal logging in the past, that our forestry reduced very strongly in the past 2-3 years. Government strongly that have the measure to be, now we can solve that issue and we can save something like a 75% of the legal for the illegal logging now, and we save that timber. We keep the green. We give back the forestry and all of that, and then we develop the tourism, like I said, and for that is still long way, my friends.
I'm so sorry. I have to interrupt because I would like to give Secretary Sharma enough time to answer our last question of the day.
Sorry
Thank you. No. It's all so interesting. We need another couple of days, actually. So, Secretary Sharma, just tell us what you think the international community should be asking the World Bank and other MDBs to be doing. What more can they be doing?
Well, thank you for that. I mean, our ambition in terms of, what is the UK's ambition? We would like to be the first generation that leaves the environment in a better state than we found it. I mean, it's a very clear ambition, and that's something that we are working towards. I mean, having said that, my background is finance, and I very much believe that actually economic growth and development doesn't have to be somehow at odds with environmental protection. I mean, they absolutely go hand in hand. And coming to the point about the World Bank and other MDBs, I mean, the reality is the World Bank is an august organization in its various sort of guises, and it leads, and where it leads, other MDBs and the private sector follows. So, I mean, from my perspective, I think the World Bank absolutely needs to continue to demonstrate international leadership in this area in terms of tackling biodiversity loss, in terms of tackling climate change. And, there will be some people who say, well, this may not be the role of the bank. I mean, I think it's absolutely vitally the role of the bank to do this. I mean, if you look at forestry degradation around the world, I mean, it is risking the livelihood of 1.2 billion of the poorest people. If we don't tackle climate change, you've got another 100 million people who are going to be thrown into poverty. So in terms of the decisions that are made, I think biodiversity absolutely has to be at the front and center of any of the big investment decisions that are made. And we were talking about finance ministries. I can tell you that the decision to double the international finance commitment of the UK, which the Prime Minister announced at UNGA, was very much a decision made jointly with our finance ministries, with our finance minister. So we absolutely get this as a government. So again, from our perspective, I think this is about the World Bank and other MDBs and the private sector actually seeking actively opportunities that are actually going to enhance biodiversity through nature-based solutions. So just to end with one example, yes, you can see whether you invest in a project where there isn't further degradation of forests, but actually how about reforestation? As we've talked about. What about those kind of investments? Next year, I think we've heard this from all our speakers, it's going to be a critical year. We've got the events in China, we've got COP26 happening in the UK. We have to make sure that next year we make it count, because what we cannot do is come back in 2021 and be having exactly the same discussion. That's not going to be fair to this generation or indeed future generations.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful panel. We're going to have two interventions from the floor. I'd like to introduce first the Swedish State Secretary for International Development and Cooperation, Per Olsen-Fried.
Thank you, and thank you to the organizers, to the speakers, and to this distinguished panel for bringing this important subject to our attention. I think we need rapidly to move ahead on this agenda to achieve and reach a healthy planet. And we need leadership and we need ownership for this to happen. And would you like to stand up? Should I stand up? Oh,
thank you.
Well. And coming to leadership, I think today leadership is partnership, and I'm concerned over the fact that we have three agendas that we work parallel with. We have one agenda for climate, we have one for biodiversity, we have one for oceans, and we need increasingly to work with them to create synergies, and so that they mutually reinforce each other instead of, in the worst case, they go against each other. So my question maybe to the panel, if you could elaborate on this, is what does it take from us, and what do we need to both politically and financially to create those synergies so that these agendas are reinforcing each other the years ahead, because we cannot afford to tackle them one by one, and then we might lose the overall objectives. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, our next intervention is from Cyril Pierre, Deputy Director General for Globalization and International Cooperation at the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Please stand.
Thank you very much. Also, very strong support to this agenda on behalf of France, and I think next year will be key with the COP26, as was said, and COP15. Just my question is the following: what is your assessment of the financial architecture at the moment regarding the financing of biodiversity? Because we have so many funds, institutions dealing with that. How can we try to unite a little bit all these initiatives? And second question, the link between biodiversity and international trade, in particular the fight against imported deforestation. What are the avenues you see regarding the adaptation of international trade rules in order to fulfill the issue of preservation of biodiversity? Thank you.
So I don't know if we have time, maybe like a three second answer.
Well, very quickly, just two questions. One is, how do we make sure that these three areas that our Swedish colleague talked about aren't somehow working against one another? Well, in the UK government, we have a simple solution, which is that we actually try and work across all departments together on these solutions. So I'm responsible for the Department of International Development, but I also have ministers sitting in there from the Foreign Office, from the Agriculture Department. We have the Business Department that we work work with. And I think that's one way that we can make a difference in our own governments. The second, in terms of financing biodiversity projects, well, I don't think what you're ever going to get to is a case where everything is put into one pot. We spend 0.7% of our gross national income on international development. A lot of that will go into tackling climate change, and we will do that both with bilateral programs that we have around the world, but then also the money that we put into multilaterals like IDA. So I mean, I think we need to find lots of solutions, lots of working together. But what I think probably needs to happen is that we need to find solutions where we are edging together as well in terms of delivering.
Okay. Ms. Ishii, please.
Very quickly, thank you for actually my dream questions. No, in fact, I guess that many of you are sitting the board of the World Bank, but also maybe council of the GF. You can do a lot to help me decide ourselves. I mentioned the food and land use program. This actually does not take the money from climate focal area, biodiversity focal area, land area focal area, and we are also doing the fashion that the pact, that this same thing, that the money comes from those three conventional focal areas. And there is a kind of resistance that in the community to decide ourselves and to take much more cross-cutting program. But things are at our hand, at your hand, if that you are all supporting to decide ourselves and to create much more cross-cutting, as mentioned by that minister, that to allow us to program much more, with flexibility and focusing on the impacts rather than just man-made industry or the silos. I think we will have a great future.
Okay. Thank you so much. Those were excellent questions, and thank you to our wonderful panel. I'm so sorry time was so short. I'm now going to invite Inger Anderson from United Nations Environment to give us some closing remarks. Inger, please.
Thank you. First of all, let me say it's really nice to be back in this room. So thank you, and what a brilliant set of panelists and opening speakers. Thinking about biodiversity and talking and listening to the speakers here, it strikes me that for too long we've assumed that season will follow seasons, that rain will follow rain, that the harvest will come, that we will be safe, and that what we had in our earlier generation, what was our grandparents' world, will be ours and will be that of our children and grandchildren. And then we hear from Madam Minister about the experience that she saw in her country, in Laos, and heard that all of a sudden there was flood and drought at the very same time, things that had never been seen before. And then we hear about the kind of issues that each and every one of us can now tell. And we hear about these changes, and we heard from Bob Watson about the fact that science is clear, and Laura telling us that science has showed up and is present. Science has got messages for us. In fact, I put it to you that yes, science has messages for us, but actually nature is speaking. And nature is telling us that we cannot take it for granted, because if we do, nature is telling us that we have taken it for granted. Nature is sending us invoices in the type of fires, invoices in the type of species loss, invoices in inundations, and in the kind of floods and droughts that we've never seen before in any time that man has been, and woman, has been on this good earth. So basically, nature is speaking. And we heard then some of the answers: natural capital accounts, understanding the value in Zambia and making that part of the mainstream story, understanding then that that value is one that cannot be degraded. And I think we've also heard about the Dasgupta review, with which I'm proud to be associated, where a government stepped steps in, Treasury taking the lead and saying, hang on a minute, let's understand the economic value of nature and let it not be led by brilliant people in the environment ministries, but actually let it be led by finance, because finance is, after all, where, as we heard, if you are a finance minister, how can you not care about nature? And so, because we have reached this tipping point, we are pressing against the very planetary boundaries. The science is indeed clear. And what we now have understood, that what we framed in 1992 in Rio, those three conventions, which took a little bit of a separate stream for a while, have come together into a mighty river. We understand now that land degradation, climate change, and biodiversity cannot be dealt with separately, but must absolutely be considered inextricably linked. And so new things have shown up. People have understood that nature-based solutions is part of the solution package. Yes, we are going to decarbonize. That's a given. And in decarbonizing, this is not even a question. But while we decarbonize, we need a breather. And nature can provide us that breather if we invest in nature's infrastructure, if we invest in nature. That infrastructure that will give us a breather of potentially 12 gigatons, which is equivalent to all the world's coal-fired power plants. That infrastructure that will protect us from the high seas and from the high winds and from the storms, etc. We have today 3.2 billion people that are living on degraded lands. We have today people who are losing the water in their lands. We have today kids who have never grown up with nature living in city lives. We have today the absolutely imperative of investing in nature. So nature-based solutions is important and is possible precisely because we know that people want to live in nature. There are interesting studies that tell us that actually children's brains develop better when they are exposed to green. This is phenomenal and something that is new and arriving. There are interesting studies where doctors, when you come with stress or diabetes, what do they prescribe? Walks in nature. Nature and exposure to green is good for us, but it's certainly also good for the planet. So, 2020, that super year, the year in which we're going to have to focus on nature. We shall hopefully be meeting in the UK for COP26. 2020 is a year when Paris Accord goes into effect, when the new NCDs that have to be with greater ambition have to be handed in. That's 2020. 2020 is a year when we need to agree on the new biodiversity targets. And yes, they have to be ambitious, but they have to be ambitious not just in getting great numbers. They have to be ambitious in terms of opening those doors and getting in these other sectors in: transport, agriculture, infrastructure, cities, energy, etc. And obviously finance. Unless those sectors have a seat at the table and begin to understand their natural capital, the value of what they have, we're not going to get ambitious targets that are doable. So we got to pop the bubble of the environment echo chamber, and we got to speak way outside that chamber. That's the only way that we will move forward, because environment is present everywhere. It is in the boardrooms, as we heard from Kering, where there is an absolute determination to make nature part of the solution and the fashion industry. It is in the voting booth. We see that at elections. It is in the public squares. It is in our school cafeterias and outside on Friday. And it is certainly in the boardrooms everywhere. Nature is here, and biodiversity is speaking to us. And we are having to look at new economic models. We're having to look at building better. We're having to look at transforming our agriculture and our finance and our food systems, as Naoko has said. And we are having to be very serious about protecting wildlife and wild species. And we're going to have to drive that restoration agenda so that those 2 billion hectares that are lying degraded, those 2 billion hectares of forest degraded land, can be brought back into service. Small agenda, easy to do. That's why we're here at the World Bank bank annual meetings. That's why you're all here. That's what we have to do. As the head of United Nations Environment Program, I look forward to working with all my friends in the banking and finance community, including obviously the World Bank. We need the private sector, we need the NGOs, we need the public, we need the finance ministers, and we need the cabinets, and we need everyone here. With that kind of commitment, we have just a chance to get there. But without it, we won't. So let's get it done. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And with that, our event is over. Thank you so much to the panel, to the organizers, and to our featured speakers.